and welcome to the September 2021 Taking Flight webinar titled OWL, Why We Do the Things That We Do. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I'm the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. My usual co-host for these Taking Flight webinars, the UCC's Amy Johnson, my OWL sister, is on sabbatical and she will return with us in November. Joining me today are Anna Bethay, the UUA's Lifespan Faith Engagement Director and my boss, also an OWL facilitator, and Reverend Michael Schunemeyer, Minister and team leader of UCC Health and Wholeness Advocacy, and Executive Director of the UCC HIV and AIDS Network, and he is an OWL trainer. And I'm grateful for their participation and also for the technical expertise of Andrea Burse from the UCC. Andrea is going to be assisting anybody who has technical issues, so you can write a note in the chat if you're having any troubles. And we would ask you to post your questions in the Q&A area of Zoom. This will help us make sure that we reach all your questions at the end of the webinar. If you put them in the chat box, they tend to get lost in all the scrolling that goes on. So before we begin talking about the whys and wherefores of our whole lives, I'd like to invite us all to take a moment of rest from what is typically a very busy season. And this year is even more busy and stressful than most would be. So let's delay our multitasking for the next few moments. Let's close our eyes or take a gentle, neutral gaze at some point in front of you. Settle into your chair, into gravity's embrace. Relax the shoulders and gently ease tension from neck and jaw. And rest. You are in the place you're meant to be in this moment. Trust that the tasks awaiting you are also meant to rest in this moment. Trust yourself to know when to rest and when to restore your energy. Take time for renewal in small moments like this, especially when time for yourself is hard to find. When you're ready, return your attention to this space, maintaining the spirit of well-deserved ease. Welcome back. I began with the gift of rest because we are reconnecting during a very confusing and very often frustrating time for all of us. When the lockdown started in 2020, Amy and I called this OWL Taking Flight because we were so sure that we would be taking flight again last fall. We just knew it. Everybody assured us, right? The pandemic was going to end. And some of us envisioned the pandemic as being a time when we could actually slow down, take some time for reflection. But that didn't quite work for us in church and congregational settings, didn't it? It turned out that we had to change directions and create new ways of being and new ways of serving people that we never would have imagined we had to do before. So in many regards, much of us experienced things speeding up during the lockdown instead of slowing down. And then there suddenly seemed to be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We were all going to get back, having religious education in person, having worship in person, having music in person, having meetings in person. And then the Delta variant hit us. And I think there's another one called the Lambda variant on its way. So what do? How do we shift gears? How do we go from that pivot point to yet another pivot point? And some of us are tempted to pivot back to where we were when things were normal. But that's not necessarily going to be possible. So Anna and Mike and I are here to sort of help you think about our whole lives, not only in how it's designed and how it's meant to be implemented, but also how we can adapt to this kind of confusing time that we're in, and what the UUA's and the UCC's role are in supporting you in that work. So based on some of the comments that I've read online or that Amy and I have discussed receiving in emails or by phone, we know that returning to OWL programming is on a lot of people's minds. Many of you have lost facilitators, which is perfectly usual, right? Facilitators come, sometimes they work for 1 year and then they leave. But after we've taken 18 months or so off from OWL programming, that lack of trained facilitators can be really frustrating. So that's on a lot of people's minds. On other people's minds is, what about the youth who lost an OWL year? How do we make up that time for them? And Mike has some really good thoughts about that. There might also be some frustrations about the recommendations and the guidance that the UCC and the UUA put forward, and sort of, you know, we're going to do it our way because we just have to get it done. So we want to help you with that. So we'll be answering some of your questions from both pragmatic and missional ways of doing that. So we're going to be talking about some things that from the program design and the way OWL works, and how that having that underlying knowledge might help you in your decision-making and discernment around when, whether, and how to restart your OWL program. And I know also that some new people, new religious educators who are new to their job are like, do I even start OWL? I'm just new to this church or this congregation, and how do I dive in here? Before we go further, I'd like to suggest, if you haven't already seen the July webinar that was reframing congregations about restarting our whole lives with the UCC's Candace Woods and the UU's C.B. Beal, I hope you will make a point to watch that. The thrust of that webinar was, don't jump right in to our whole lives right now. Don't start in September, maybe don't even start in October or November. Here are the reasons why. Because we've forgotten how to be people together. We have forgotten how to work in groups. And that's essential in all of our discernment. So let's move forward. So as most of you probably know, Our Whole Lives is a comprehensive lifespan curriculum, goes from kindergarten through older age. And every level of OWL was developed by professional educators with specialties in sexuality education and with the social development, sexual development, and psychological development of people at different spaces of the lifespan. The early editions were guided by the standards set by the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, or SIECUS. And in 2012, and then updated in 2014, were the national standards for sexuality education for grades K through 12. And I'm very pleased to say that all our younger ages meet or exceed those newer standards. So, and I've written a white paper, if anybody needs a white paper on how OWL matches up with those national standards, just email me at mjdavis@uua.org and I can send you that. The reason that's important is because OWL is used in many school settings that need to have sort of research-based evidence as to why it's an important program. So when we revised the 7 to 9 edition, we became more transparent about how those standards impact the curriculum. So you'll notice that in 7 to 9 and in the older adult edition, we actually talk about some of the learning and developmental theories that go behind Our Whole Lives. And for those of you who are theory geeks like myself, I will share with you an example of how this works. So one of the theories behind Our Whole Lives 7 to 9 is social learning theory. And that acknowledges that learning takes place within a social context. So if you think about how we offer Our Whole Lives, we have groups generally of 10 to 20 people in the same age cohort learning from each other, of course, guided by 2 adult facilitators. but they benefit from youth bonding, from time together, from, shared jokes and shared experiences. The social cognitive theory stresses the importance of self-efficacy, which means when you have self-efficacy, you believe that you have the capacity to change and control your own behavior. And that focuses on what motivates learners and the importance of affective learning. So affective learning, those are the feelings. So if you think about what kids are getting in school, they're getting the cognitive, this is how reproduction works stuff, or this is how you prevent the scary stuff, right? But OWL takes things deeper. It really involves thinking about, how do I feel about this? What are my values around that? So that can only happen when you have time. So that's why we have lengthy sessions. When Amy Johnson and Kristen Defer revised the 4-6 edition, they lengthened the workshops from an hour to 75 minutes to allow more time for young people to actually ponder, what is this information? How do I make meaning of it? How do I feel about it? And we do that across the board. So why is this important to you? So anytime we're thinking about changing the program in any way or shortening the program, we need to think about, well, how is that affecting the way this curriculum was designed and the way this people of this age group learn? As an aside, when you think about OWL for older adults, older adult learning theory takes even more time, because older adults don't want to be told things. They want their wisdom. I should say we want ours. I'm 61. That wisdom in the room is what carries the discussions. So this is why we need to know what the nuts and bolts are behind the curriculum. So when we talk about the social cognitive theory that is in 7 to 9 and 4 to 6, we build empathy. We get to those feelings through the stories that the young people are reading, through the discussions that they have, through the role plays that they're doing, them playing the part of somebody other than themselves. They're learning from other peers who have different life experiences, sometimes different races, different cultures, different abilities. So they're learning from each other in a way that they just wouldn't if they just read something in a book or saw a video. Another aspect of 7 to 9 is the social ecological model of prevention, which is a very long way of saying that our individual choices are affected by who we relate to, by the community that we're surrounded by, and by the larger society that we're in. And that's why Our Whole Lives includes videos, book recommendations, bringing in guest speakers, optional field trips to health clinics if you choose to do that, group decisions, and above all, parents and caregivers as the primary sexuality educators of their children. So it's not just what we do in 90 minutes, it's a lot bigger than that. And Anna and Mike, I'm wondering if you'd like to jump in and talk about the influence of people beyond the scope of just the group of 10 or 12 kids in an OWL program. Would either of you like to talk about that?
Sure. I think one of the wonderful things that we can provide in our programs is this, not just the content, as you were saying, Melanie, but how do we navigate the world and seek out wisdom? Who are our trusted sources? And that provides the scaffolding for lifelong learning beyond just what we're able to provide here, because as we know, information and things that we know about sexuality change over time as our culture changes, and those are skills that can be used beyond what we're able to teach now in this moment. So yeah.
And Mike, the UCC is even expanding that to another continent, right? Would you like to talk for a moment about how OWL is being used in Tanzania?
Well, right. So we actually initiated through some of the HIV work that we were doing. We connected with folks in the Church of Sweden who were also doing very similar work as we were, and we were partners with them in some work through the World Council of Churches. And out of that, discovered that a HIV prevention curriculum called SAVE was pretty much cut from the same mold of values that the OWL curriculum is shaped from, right? Our key values for doing OWL. And through that, we did some experimenting with exposing folks to the OWL curriculum. And out of that came an invitation to go to Tanzania and do a workshop with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tanzania. And so Amy Johnson and JP Mogeti Heath worked together on a workshop there that went very, very well. And out of that, some leadership has grown in Tanzania. And so we have developed a life and relationships curriculum there that's based on OWL. And it's not exactly OWL, but it's based on OWL. And we are partnering with them to begin to implement that. And from that, there are others now in the continent of Africa who are interested in also taking this up, including some potential partnerships with the UN and others to really give us the capacity we need to take it further. But it's really exciting to see the way in which the values resonate so clearly with folks in other parts of the world. And we've done a little bit of exposure in the Philippines, not to the degree that we've done in Tanzania, but have had similar kinds of experiences. There's lots of cultural relevance work that has to be done as a part of it.
There is.
And, we've done that, it included some interfaith elements, which is important because we have a partnership with Imam from South Africa who's helped us with some things there. And anyway, it's been very exciting to see it flower.
I think that the reason I invited you to mention that is because very often when people deeply understand how OWL is designed, and it's developmentally appropriate, and it's got it's very intentional in its design, that we don't. That's why when people say, we're going on a mission trip to Mexico, can we bring our whole lives? Well, that cultural work, that deep cultural work that you've done with people in the country who asked for this, that's essential. It's not us saying, here's our great curriculum, use it. So
we haven't just thrown it out there. We've been working, this has been a process that has occurred over the last 6 years.
Yeah.
And we still are working with a very small group of people. We are on the cusp of being able to do more and build our capacity with it, but it's because of the step-by-step process that we work with partners moving forward and making sure that what we're doing is very much culturally relevant to the community that is going to be taking it up.
Right. And the application to people in the United States who are on this call is that we're very often saying, if you have a small cohort of people, invite people into your congregation. And this can be, introducing them to come into you, but don't just go out into the community and randomly offer our whole lives to people who may or may not find it culturally relevant to them. So we do want to afford opportunities for community program when it is as thoughtful. Doesn't necessarily take 6 years if you want to do it in your hometown, but Amy and I are here to provide some guidance if people do want to open the program into the community. And we do have a couple places across this country where people are offering wonderful community programs of OWL. Also, quite a lot of schools. We're getting increasing numbers of private schools, especially, that are using our OWL programs. So let's getting back to OWL design. So every level of our whole lives has learning goals and objectives. Now, learning goals are something sort of the overarching What do we want people to get out of this 60, 75, 90 minutes that they're spending together, or 2 hours if they're older adults? So what do we hope will change about their thinking or their behavior as a result of this workshop? The goals are never really measurable. It's sort of aspirational. The measurable parts are the learning objectives. So when you're thinking about which workshops can be paired together on a, let's say, a retreat, which we want to shorten our program a little bit because we're starting in January. So what works together? You can look at the goals and the learning objectives to see, are these compatible? Do we want to pair these two workshops here and these three some other weekend, or how do we want to do that? So as an example, for the consent education workshop in the grades 7 to 9 curriculum, the workshop goals are to define the components of consent and identify verbal signals of consent and non-consent, to introduce and have participants practice skills for seeking consent and receiving a partner's positive or negative response, and to encourage participants to take responsibility as bystanders to intervene and prevent or interrupt sexual harassment and coercion. So those are big goals that we're trying to achieve. Understand that those are probably, they're big goals to achieve in 90 minutes, but they're going to be reinforced. That's why when we do OWL, we say do it consecutively, because what you learn in this workshop, you will later learn in another workshop in the sequence of the workshops. Now, the learning objectives are measurable. They start with an action verb. So something that somebody is doing something. So for example, in this particular workshop, they will be able to list the components of sexual consent, list at least 2 examples of verbal signals of consent, list 2 examples of verbal signals of non-consent, differentiate between consensual sex and different forms of sexual violence and violation, and state at least 2 strategies a bystander can use to prevent or interrupt an incident of sexual harassment or coercion. So they do this, so those objectives, we do those through the activities. So the consent, the physical signs of consent, of acceptance and rejection. We have an activity called Can I Give You a Fist Bump? So the youth walk around the room and they get to choose. They don't tell anybody, but they put up their fists and they say, can I give you a fist bump? And the people can say yes, the people can say no. And what we teach people is how to accept being turned down and how to feel comfortable turning somebody down. And then they talk about, well, what would that seem like if you were out on a date with somebody? How would you convert, no, I don't want a fist bump, to no, I don't want to make out, or no, I don't want to have sex. So why is this important? So when we think about condensing things, what part of this workshop has to go? We have to be very intentional about the changes that we make. When Amy and I created last year the When You Can't Do OWL Online, Do This protocol, which is still online, the whole thrust of it was we can't do it all. Yeah, we can't keep people online forever. So let's shrink the 90 minutes into 30 minutes. We're not going to have all those activities, but we still want to address the values, responsibility, for example. We still want to address the value of justice in terms of everybody being able to consent or not consent. So how could we do that in a 30-minute discussion and still paying attention to the Our Whole Lives values? So if nothing else, keep your mind on the learning objectives and the OWL values, and how any way you implement or adapt the program, you can still retain that substance. One of the things that we're hearing a lot of is concern about, as I mentioned earlier, the missed year, that people somehow didn't get OWL and there's a rush to offer it to them. And so some settings are thinking about combining 3 years of participants. Now, one of the things that we have held steadfast to all along is not to combine, even though it's a 4 through 6 curriculum or a 7 to 9 curriculum, you would either have 4th and 5th graders or 5th and 6th graders or just 5th graders or any one of those years, or just 7th graders or 7th and 8th graders, but not 7th and 9th graders. And the reason is because there are developmental differences that are very great. When you think about 7th graders, some of them are actively in puberty. Some of them haven't yet entered puberty. Some of them are pretty I hate to use the word sophisticated, but some of them have had a lot of exposure to sexual violence in video games or porn. Some of them haven't had any of that exposure or a lot, but then you're mixing them with that. So there's already a lot of difference in the 7th grade. Then if you combine them with the 9th graders, we're adding some people who may have already had sexual experiences, starting to date, certainly having conversations with what the seniors in high school are doing or what culture at their high school is, which adds a lot to the mix. And Mike, I'd like to invite you to talk about how the OWL values wrap into that.
Right. Well, one of the things that we project about the curriculum pretty consistently in our training and in our messaging is what Melanie was talking about before when she was talking about SEEK, is how intentional we are about making sure that the curriculum is age appropriate. And we kind of make that commitment. We make that commitment to our young people who participate in the program. We make that commitment to our parents. We make that commitment to the community that we serve. And so when we begin to become creative with how we configure age groupings, making sure that those age groupings that we're working with are receiving material that is age appropriate to them is a value that we have and a commitment that we share. And I just think it's important for us to be really intentional about that as we kind of move forward and try to figure out how can we help advance the OWL curriculum coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I'll hear people say, well, we did it and it worked. And my answer to that is just because we do something is not a guarantee that it worked or that it didn't do harm. It just means that we did it and nobody complained. So that can't be, the fact that we just got through it can't be why. So Anna, when we were talking offline earlier, you were talking about sometimes the pressure that people feel to do this. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to validate the feelings that come up around, oh, we're behind, or oh, we didn't get this and we're not going to get it. And I think you covered this, that in OWL it's consecutive, so it's something that will be acquired at some point, and also underneath the validation and helping people to feel that what they're feeling is okay, it is really starting to examine where are these fears coming from. And a lot of times the fears are set up from preconceived notions of what normal is, or what's supposed to happen, what should be learned by this age, what has happened before, what the church or the community has offered before. And there's a lot of questioning that's happening, right now in our culture of like, what are those things that we want to continue to honor? How are we continuing to honor the things that we have done in our community in the past? And how might we be changing and shaping change so that we don't get in a state of fear that we're not getting something, or that our children are falling behind, and really questioning the motivations and of where those fears come from. Those are complex conversations to have, but I think especially in our faith communities, those are the places where we can hold space for people to examine those complexities.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. And that goes back to what the July webinar addressed, is the pressure to get back to normal. and that we can let go. It can be helpful to let go of some of that pressure when we think of it as expectations. Now, there are alternatives too. So if you're not in a position to offer OWL for the high school level, and you have a cohort that didn't benefit from taking Our Whole Lives, you have a couple options. You can offer 2 classes of Our Whole Lives. So you can offer, a small subset. I've taught OWL with as few as 7 young people. It wasn't ideal. The dialogue wasn't as rich, but they got it. So just because the curriculum says it's designed for 10 to 20 odd people, doesn't mean you can't have a small cohort. You can also open your doors. A UU congregation can extend a hand to the UCC congregation in town, or the Methodists, or the Presbyterians, or anybody, the Jewish community, right? Or just the community at large. Sometimes Planned Parenthoods and community youth serving centers have an interest in offering programming, but they don't necessarily have the facilitators. So if you want to create a cohort of 9th graders who didn't get Our Whole Lives when they were in 8th grade, those are ways that you can build a cohort of sort of old, kids in the same age group who are doing the material together. And then that leaves you your existing OWL program for the 8th graders that you might normally offer it to. The other thing that you can do is look at some of the resources that we have. Andrea, if you could put in the chat box those links. Both the UCC and the UUA have pages of resources. And we used to have these within this document called When You Can't Do OWL Online, Do This. I actually pulled those resources out recently to be separate documents. So you'll find a list of resources for at-home use for kindergartners through 6th grade. And those were curated by the authors of the upcoming K through 1 revision. And they include sort of, here's how to use this book at home. The list that I curated is from resources from grade 7 to older age. I don't have all the teaching tips in there, but they're books that you can share with families. And if you can't have them in your library, you can certainly provide those lists to parents. Somebody I spoke to recently said, wouldn't it be great if churches and congregations just bought families, that needed a couple copies of these books. So those are nice resources that if you can't offer OWL to the high schoolers, at least you can offer resources to them. We also have the Parents and Caregivers as Sexuality Educators program, which Robin Slaw did a webinar, Taking Flight webinar on how to adapt it for online use. You could certainly do that online or in person, whatever your setting is safe to do. And the UCC is about this close to publishing their own version of the curriculum. It is a small group ministry format. And the way it can support parents as sexuality educators is by helping them think through the issues that their youth and young teens are going through, and how the messages that they want to communicate with the young people in their lives. So those resources are available to the teens as well. So I would encourage you to look up those resources and avail yourself of them and share them with the families. Now, I know a lot of you are concerned about training, so I want to take a few minutes to talk about where we stand in terms of Our Whole Lives trainings. In 2019, for the lockdown, we had 70 trainings. Now, when you do the math and you multiply each of those trainings by about 20 people, that's a lot of people that we had entering the folds of what we now think are about 12,000 people who are trained to facilitate Our Whole Lives. Many of those, if not most, were hosted by congregational life staff of the UUA. And we are both the UCC and the UUA are on hiatus from hosting in-person events, and Anna and Mike can talk about that in a minute. What you will see if you go to see our calendars on the UCC and the UUA web pages, there are some trainings. Any training that makes it onto our calendars is open to the public. So you are welcome to send people. We are not, we've trained the trainers and we have put in place the guidelines for how those trainings have to take place, but we are not responsible for the logistics of the training. So if you want to send somebody, that's you and the person that you're sending need to be discerning about their own safety issues there. And feel free to talk to the registrar and find out what the facilities are, what kind of spacing is there. OWL trainings are typically, and Mike and Anna can attest to this, 3 days of intense close space contact. And even if you're sitting 6 feet from people, you're going to be working together, passing each other in the hallway, making flip charts together. It is a pretty intense in-person experience. So Mike and Anna, maybe you can talk to how our relative organizations are coming up with the positions that we've taken regarding in-person trainings.
Can speak a little bit from the UCC perspective. Like the UUA, we are organized in a congregational way. So the restrictions or protocols that we have in place for the national setting aren't binding on the local settings. So each setting gets to make up its own mind about those things. However, we are open and public about the kind of protocols that we do have. And I know that our senior leaders, our HR department are very diligent in following the CDC recommendations and making sure that those things are happening. And I think it's sound advice to advise those that you may send to a training to make sure that they know what the safety protocols that are in place. What are they going to do if someone tests positive while they're at the training, and how will that affect the training? Those are important questions to know. And if somebody tests positive, will you find out afterwards? How will you be informed about those kinds of things? So I just think that these are risks that people need to consider. And if you're fully vaccinated and those kinds of things, you may feel that it's a risk that you're willing to take and you want to move forward with. But it really is not something that we can endorse, but we will do what we can to provide whatever support to the trainings that we can as they're moving forward, because we want people to be safe, and we want to make sure that if a training is going forward, that it's going to be a competent training.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, very similarly to what Mike said for the UUA as well. Just in case those of you who may be looking for UUA updated guidance and you haven't seen it yet, I just put a link in the chat for our updated guidance for the Delta variant, which just came out a couple weeks ago. And there's good stuff on there as far as thinking about cycles of grief and denial and bargaining and all of these different ways that this moves through our own bodies and our communities and our systems, and to our expectation is that our people are considering closely and carefully the local guidance of your public health officials in your areas. There's some links on that page that will, if you don't know how to check how that's going in your local area, there's some links on that page that will help you to do that. And also the values that guide what our guidance is for the UUA, and some general values that can then help you in your own community as well. Let me make sure I covered everything I wanted to be looking at. Yeah. So, yeah, and not just your local conditions, but I think you've mentioned this in the past, Melanie, but the conditions for trainers if they're traveling, where they're traveling from. So those are all things to take into consideration.
Yeah, individual congregations are welcome to host trainings if you feel it's safe to do that, or you might want to combine with a UCC church or another local organization. We have a planning guide if you would like to host a training. But one of the things it would encourage you to think about is we have found from the trainings that have occurred, the feedback that we've gotten both from participants and from trainers, is that, again, I said the youth have forgotten how to people, the adults have too. And what we are finding is that people are more short-tempered. They are harder to get a group to coalesce over the 3 days. They're much more critical of trainers than they used to be. Trainers that we know normally, get fabulous feedback are getting this nitpicky thing that isn't really training related. They're complaining about the curriculum, and that has nothing to do with the training itself. It's just that bring those to me. Don't take that out on your trainers. So we're actually asking if you host a training to build another hour into the schedule to allow the trainers time before the actual training begins for some group building, and to let people express their fears and their concerns, their frustrations, and to start building some empathy among the group and some trust with each other and with the trainers. So that can happen before you take a deep dive into the content. So just keep that in mind, that when you look at the planning guide, it has a certain number of hours. Just talk to the trainers to see about building in at the start an additional hour for that community building time. Yes, we're here to support you if you do that. We're just one of our values when we think about not hosting trainings ourselves. The one I think that is the value of justice and inclusivity is overarching. We think about who can't attend a training, who can't attend an OWL program that's in person, and how do we adapt to include as many people as possible. Which brings me to online trainings. The next month's Taking Flight will be about the online training process. I'll be joined by Reverend Thea Raslis, who is actually was involved in the August field test and is one of our wonderful OWL trainers. We did a pilot test in the spring. We did 2 trainings in August. So we had 2 cohorts with 4 trainers. And we got a lot of wonderful information, and we're still revising the training, but we will have 2 online trainings in January. And Thea and I will be talking about how online training differs from in-person training. And the short story, if you can't make it in October, is that the onus will be on endorsers or sponsors, so that's generally the religious educators, to be very careful about vetting the people that you send to trainings to make sure that they are the most appropriate people, because online the trainers cannot do the amount of intense observation that can be done in person. So come in October and we will share more about that process. I also want to show, before we go to questions and answers, I'm very excited to say that we have this video series that we're going to be releasing late fall. It is produced by Dorian Solat and Marshall Miller, who are the authors of the upcoming edition of the K1 the revision of the K1 program. They did a webinar last fall about the new books that they're going to be including as recommended texts for the K1 curriculum. And So these videos are 2 to 3 minutes long. They're designed for parents. Of course, anybody can watch them. But it's like, here are these books, and here's how you can use these books at home with your children. And they've just done a wonderful job of selecting texts that represent all kinds of families, all kinds of people, all kinds of identities. Some have animals, some have people, some, it's just a wonderful collection. And the topics go along with the topics that are in the curriculum. So they have one more in the series to complete before we are able to release the series, but I'm just really excited and happy to be able to share that with you. So that concludes the business, but now let's get to the questions. Anna, would you like to read some of the questions that we might have and we can answer them?
Sure. All right, let me go back up to the top here. Adrian has a couple of questions. Adrian Summerlot, hoping to hear what strategies we might use to ready our 7th and 9th graders so that when we can restart OWL, they will be more connected and supported to engage with the content and in relationship with each other fully.
So if you go back, Adrian, and watch the July Taking Flight, Candace has some good ideas for that. Candace Woods, and one of the if you don't already subscribe to the OWL newsletter, Amy publishes a quarterly OWL newsletter that has some links in it also. But Andrea, if you have the link to the restorative justice piece, if you could tuck that into the chat. I'm sorry to catch you off guard. I don't know if it's there, but anybody who registered for this webinar, we can include the link there. But Candace had recommended something called Restorative Circles. And that is a process that can help bring people back together. And also just simply games, playing, I know there used to be a guide, Anna, what was it? There was a whole UUA guidebook on games that REs used. I don't know if we have a replacement.
Deep fun. Yeah, yes. It's
I don't
a little outdated, but I think there's still a link to it from our youth pages. I'll see if I can pick that up.
But also just, bringing the youth together and letting them choose the game. I mean, my group always liked apples to apples and bananagrams, but every group is different and every group has a different way of bonding. And you might want to think about the sexuality and our faith ways of starting with ritual, whether it's prayer or gathering around a centering candle, chalice lighting, and reflecting. So you might create a ritual followed by games to just some discussions. What's going on in your life? What's going on in the news? Just the time, putting in the time, I think is important. And then also, throw in a pizza and everybody's happy. Gluten-free for a lot of kids. What's another question?
Okay, next one. Also interested to hear about how to tenderly support the shared experience kids of all ages and families have about being in this pandemic together and apart, including our K-1 kids don't know social gatherings, school, or church any other way than masked and socially distanced.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind, I'm on the UU Trauma Response Ministry. And one of the things that we do when we do pastoral response to folks in crisis, which this certainly is. In fact, Battle and Campbell and I did a General Assembly workshop that's archived online that you can watch about how this process works. But one of the prime things that we don't do counseling, but we let people tell their stories. So this could be especially good for younger kids. Let's draw some pictures. What did we miss most during this time apart? Or what was good? What did we get to do during this time apart that we wouldn't have otherwise? Or who did we lose? Maybe somebody lost a grandma and couldn't go to a funeral. But letting people just tell their stories about what their experience was, can be very healing in and of itself. And of course, you'd look at the age group and what are they able to do? Maybe the little kids need arts and crafts and putting a pebble in some water, but older children can write a prayer or intention and do whatever spiritual practice works for them. Maybe reading poetry or having them write poetry. But I think that activity of not having to do work, but just being able to feel a little bit and reflect and then get out of that, understand how to move forward from those feelings and bring what they've learned forward. That would be what I would suggest. Anna or Mike, you have suggestions?
One of the things that I think we learn to do when we facilitate OWL is group process, and just spending more time in paying attention to that. I think that a lot of kids have had the opportunity to be in classroom settings, especially recently, because many schools have opened at least to some degree of in-person learning, or they've had some kind of socializing through sporting events or other kinds of clubs like scouting and things like that that have had some in-person activities over the summer. So it's not going to be a total strange thing, but I do believe it's really critical to pay attention to the group dynamics and to do those icebreaker type activities and activities that get people relating to each other. And, those kinds of story games that you were mentioning, Melanie, I think are really important because it gets people verbalizing about their experiences and sharing, and that helps to build and secure the relationships that you want to be able to do the program going forward. I think a lot of times it's more us adults who need more of the re-entry for socializing because we've been trapped behind computer screens and doing our work remotely and those kinds of things. And I think many of us need to focus on some of our re-socializing as well.
Yeah. Anna, were there any other questions?
Oh, yes, let's see, more questions. Emily Crutcher asks, if it feels like some learning objectives may take longer to sink in and would really be best to give participants some time to process and integrate, at least an overnight, if not a week. Could you speak to which topics or learning objectives may benefit from more processing time for participants, or if this is most relevant for older age groups?
No, in fact, thank you, Emily, for bringing that up. So all of the levels of our whole lives are designed in some way to incorporate the experiential learning cycle. And what that cycle does is it kind of moves people toward that kind of reflection and processing. It starts with an activity. That's sort of a concrete thing that people do. They hear something that's read to them, they watch a video, they do a role play, there's an activity. Then they discuss what happened, what did we see? How did that feel when I experienced that? Was I frustrated? Was I silly? Was I happy? Was I confused? How did other people around the room seem to relate to it? Then the next step is, well, what does this all mean to me? Okay, so we put a condom on a condom demonstrator and I figured out that it was slippery in my hands. What does that mean to me? Oh, well, I might want to have wet wipes. So they're then processing, they're moving from what happened to what meaning does that have for me? And then they move into the stage of now what, which is what are the applications for the future? So from an activity of learning how to put a condom on a demonstrator, they might learn, oh, I need to talk to my partner ahead of time to see whether we're going to need condoms, whether I want to do anything that requires a condom, where we would get the condoms. Do we both know how to use the condoms? So they start thinking ahead. So this whole cycle helps move those learning objectives through from the experience to the how to put this to use. Now, when people think about planning double sessions, yes, you are jamming a lot together, But that's why we don't do 3 sessions. That's why if we have a weekend lock-in, you might do a workshop on a Friday night, then take a night to see movies and, enjoy games. And then Saturday, you might do 2 workshops. Then you don't do anything for another week. So you let people have that space. Ideally, if you do meet once a week, then they do have a whole week to think about and reflect on what they've learned. And often the next time you gather, we'll say, well, what did you talk to anybody about what you learned last week? Or who put some of that new information to use? So that's how that gets incorporated. And that's why when Amy and I say, don't do a 26-week program in 5 weeks. Don't do it as a summer camp. Well, high school, you have a little more flexibility, but with the younger programs, don't jam everything together, because even adults need time to process and reflect, but especially young people. This experiential learning cycle sets up what's called cognitive dissonance. So you're getting a new concept that kind of shakes up what you thought might have been true. It rattles the mythology and the misunderstandings, right? So it confuses what you thought was true and brings in new knowledge. And anytime we have cognitive dissonance and we're trying to address it, we need time. So that's why we always recommend giving lots of breathing space to your program. Thank you, Emily.
Okay, the next one I think might be a little quick, but would be good to re-articulate, I think. Patricia asks, are OWL programs only done live and in person? Should we wait if we are only able to do Zoom?
Yeah, so the Our Whole Lives curriculum is not an online curriculum. That said, we know that a lot of you would like to address needs, and your programs, your church and congregational settings are not open for in-person. So if you go to the facilitators pages that Andrea linked earlier, both on the UCC site and the UUA site, you will find a document called "When You Can't Do OWL Online, Do This." And what you'll want to do is to scroll past the book recommendations and get to the guidance for creating an online adaptation for 7 to 9. And that's the only one that we've experimented with. But as I said earlier, there are 18 instead of 26. There's 18 topics that you would cover in 30 minutes rather than 90. So it's not an OWL program. We don't want you calling it an OWL program. You can call it whatever you want based on OWL, but don't call it OWL. And the main point of those suggestions or the guidance is to keep the values at the top. So you're going to focus on the OWL values in the discussions that you have around the topics that are there. It doesn't replace an OWL program, but it is something that you can offer in addition to the parents and caregivers as sexuality educators. So the parents are working at home, and all those resources that are curated for your use.
Okay, and then Adrian asks, would it be helpful or possible to combine the kids 7 through 9 for a lesson, but break into smaller groups for role play and discussion? 7 to 8 in one group and 9 in another. Concern is the 9th graders really have missed some critical opportunities for these conversations. And if we don't offer for 7 through 8 this year, then we further have the same problem with having 9th graders next school year who need it, along with the 7th and 8th graders as well. Also, pushback from parents who are very emotional about this, and when public schools are actually harming youth with their education.
Right. So, Mike, you made a good point about this earlier when we were talking about exactly this question. Would you like to answer this one?
Well, probably with some trepidation. Always the challenge will be, and when you have 9th graders present, that there's never with seventh graders, that there's never a time then, well, there's always the possibility for what happens when the group is all together, because there are conversations and information you can't control in those settings. Is it a huge risk? You probably 95% of the information is going to be fine, but there's that 5 or 10% that might not be. And that those not official data, research, statistics. I'm just kind of, giving you that sense, and you'll have to make a judgment about whether that, so if it really is that important for you, and Melanie, please feel free to push back, that segmenting them for the conversation or dividing into small groups might be a viable option, and would be an effort to really make sure that it's as age appropriate as possible. But I get your dilemma. I really do get that.
Yeah.
Get that dilemma.
Yeah, and one of the things we don't want is a ninth grader saying, well, that was a stupid question to a seventh grader, right? Because there is going to be a difference in knowledge and life experience, and what's cool and what the norms are. My preference would be that you start a standalone ninth grade group, and either so you can still offer the program, even if it's a small group. You can open your doors to teens in the community, invite the teens in your program to invite their friends. That would be my recommendation if you can swing it at all. But yeah, you have the authority as an independent congregation and or church to do what you feel is best for your setting. Any other questions? We're just about out of time.
There was just one that I answered by typing a response, but I don't know if Melanie, you wanted to address at all. Emily asked if, the 3-day training seems like a crucial experience for brand new ALF facilitators. Are there booster sessions for ALF facilitators who've previously done the in-person training?
Thanks for the question. Every time we come out with a new edition, we do a webinar on that edition. Those are all archived on the RE pages. These Taking Flight webinars that we've done for the past year and a half are archived on the UCC and the UUA site. I would highly recommend that your facilitators watch them. We don't have a recertification program, but if your folks have never had an opportunity to run the program, or they haven't done it in like 4 or 5 years, we recommend, if you could swing it, to send them to another training just for updated language. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in October when we talk about the online trainings. Thank you.